The topics we're covering in this series are those that kept emerging throughout that research. Our goal for this series is threefold. First, to help our community thoroughly understand local needs. Second, to showcase how local nonprofits, the tremendous work that they're doing to address those needs. And finally, to highlight the critical role that local donors, volunteers, and other community members play in addressing those efforts. Our hope is that this will enable us to come together as a community to serve our neighbors in need throughout the current crisis and really beyond. We are so grateful to our sponsor, Sutter Health. Without support from Sutter Health, we wouldn't be able to put on this event series. Sutter, of course, is deeply invested in addressing this pandemic as a local healthcare organization, as well as an important supporter of many of our local nonprofits. I'd also like to share the following statement in Sutter Health's own words. As a not-for-profit organization, Sutter Health reinvests in the communities we serve through community benefit programs that address priority health needs for underserved and vulnerable populations. Community is at the heart of who we are and what we do. Our work goes beyond traditional healthcare, and we extend support outside the walls of hospitals and care centers, which helps improve the overall health of the community. We're thrilled to sponsor Yolo Community Foundation's COVID-19 Community Needs Series and take part in these important discussions. We look forward to hearing from all the wonderful panelists, many of whom are collaborative partners of ours, and sharing the valuable information learned throughout the series with our organizations. In Sutter Health, we're thrilled for the opportunity to work with you. We at the Yolo Community Foundation have so enjoyed hosting this panel series. For those of you who aren't familiar with YCF, our mission is to inspire and support giving and to provide philanthropic leadership in our community. Our organization was founded in 2001, and today, 20 years later, we have $7 million in assets, which are spread across 65 individual funds set up by local philanthropists and nonprofit organizations. In 2020, we made $1.5 million in grants, and we're an affiliate of the Sacramento Region Community Foundation. Our work at the foundation falls into three pillars. First, we work to inspire giving. We do that by offering philanthropic funds, like donor advised funds and nonprofit endowments, that make giving easier, tax advantage, and more effective. And we also promote philanthropy through events, media outreach, and other programming. We work to support philanthropists through one-on-one staff support, as well as through events like site visits, small group discussions, and expert panels like our event today. Our goal for supporting philanthropists is to provide them with the education to be effective in their giving, the inspiration to be excited about giving, and a sense of connection to a community of peers working to serve Yolo County and beyond through philanthropy. And then finally, we work to serve nonprofits directly. If we do those first two pillars well, we are increasing the quantity and quality of giving in Yolo County. And so we do that by growing local giving. We also do that by offering agency funds, as I mentioned, like nonprofit endowment funds. But in addition, we have several grant making initiatives, as well as professional development programming. And then finally, a key part of what we do is offer several types of philanthropic vehicles. So these are financial vehicles, somewhat like a checking account or a 401k, but they're designed to support your philanthropy. These funds can simplify your giving, can make it more effective, and can have major tax benefits. Fund holders have access to foundation staff support, and they join a community of peers working to serve Yolo County through philanthropy. Our most common fund type is the donor advised fund, which is a lot like a private foundation, except that at $10,000, the minimum fund size is much, much lower. So if you're interested in learning more about how to collaborate with the Yolo Community Foundation, whether as a fund holder, a nonprofit partner, a volunteer, please don't hesitate to contact me at jessica.hubbard@yolocf.org. And now I'm thrilled to introduce our moderator, Sandra Sigrist. Sandra is currently the Interim Chief Executive Officer for Yolo County Housing Authority, and she also serves as the Interim Executive Director of the Housing Authority's nonprofit development arm, which is called the New Hope Community Development Corporation. Sandra holds a master's degree and clinical license in social work, and she brings more than 30 years of experience in the social work field to her efforts, having worked the majority of her career in mental health and homeless intervention roles. Sandra's interests include improved health through whole person care, international travel, and meditation. We're so fortunate to have you here with us today. Sandra, thank you for moderating. I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, technical issues. Got myself unmuted. Hello, everyone. I'm really happy to be here today and to be moderating this panel of really knowledgeable folks in the area of housing insecurity and ways we can address this issue in the community. So I do want to make two quick comments. One of the central responses to housing insecurity during the course of the pandemic through the government has been a across the board eviction moratorium for people who either lost income or had other kinds of issues arise due to COVID related effects, such as children at home and completely having to revamp their lives. So I do want to be clear that the eviction moratorium is still in place for the next couple of months. Because the rules around it have been changing at local, state, and federal levels, I encourage folks with questions to reach out to Legal Services of Northern California and refer other folks with questions there, because it does matter, especially for folks who are already marginally housed, that we really help that fear around the housing insecurity on that end not get more impactful than it already is. So that was one thing I wanted to say. The second thing is there has been an influx of dollars to address housing insecurity overall during the pandemic through rental relief and utility relief funds for low-income individuals. Having said that, they were being primarily administered locally, and the county of Yolo has opted into a state program. There is over $13 million allocated specifically to Yolo County residents for this relief. The relief can pay rent in arrears back to basically the start of the pandemic. And that process at the state just went live at 5 p.m. on Monday night. I'm sure it's quite a work in progress, but the website is Housing is Key. And there is a portal that people can find there as tenants and a portal that landlords can access there. So I really wanted to make sure upfront to get that information out so that as we engage in the depth of the discussion today, people are aware of those financial resources available. So with getting us going today, ahead of questions, I want to introduce the panelists. I'll start with Lynette Erlmeyer. Lynette is currently the Executive Director of Empower Yolo. She has been an advocate for victims of intimate partner violence, sexual assault, and child abuse for nearly 30 years. Lynette has been the Director of dual domestic violence and sexual assault programs in both Iowa and Maryland before moving to California. She has a long history of advocating for economic justice policies that help communities and nonprofits strengthen the social safety net for low-income and housing insecure individuals and families. Thank you, Lynette. We're super happy to have you here. Next, I want to introduce Anush Jajorian. She is the co-founder of the Apo Yolo project. This is a partnership with the Yolo Interfaith Immigration Network that began in March of 2020 and is helping keep Spanish-speaking immigrants in Yolo County housed, fed, and safe during the COVID-19 pandemic. Jajorian was selected for the Davis's Brinley Award this year for her community service. She also coordinates the Yolo Rainbow Families parent and teen groups for the Davis Phoenix Coalition. She is the principal of Inclusive Futures Consulting, LLC, which provides support for educators, parents, and institutions to teach children about identity differences and how to be inclusive across identity lines. Welcome. And lastly, I'd like to introduce Doug Zeck to the panel. Doug is the Executive Director for Fourth and Hope. He has more than 20 years of experience in executive leadership and management. In his role as Fourth and Hope Executive Director, Doug is continuing a family legacy. His grandfather, Walter Zeck, was among the founders of Fourth and Hope, formerly known as Yolo Wayfarer Center Christian Mission, and he grew the organization to address the causes of homelessness, to include supportive housing programs and treatment for substance use disorders. Doug's insight into homelessness and addiction trends is providing the necessary leadership to successfully position forth and hope in Medi-Cal certification and excellence in substance use disorder treatment services. So welcome, Doug. So excited to have you all here. And what I'm hoping is to have a pretty open and robust discussion about housing security or insecurity from each of your perspectives with your knowledge base. And I'm going to sort of kick it off here with an overarching frame question for all of you. And we can start, I guess, and do this in the order I introduced you. So we'll start with Lynette. Please share a brief overview of your organization and what you do to address housing insecurity in Yolo County.
Sure. Thank you, Sandra. Thanks for having me here today on the panel as well. So many of you know Empower Yolo by our old name, the Sexual Assault and Domestic Violence Center. And at our core, that is still who we are. We provide a safe house, legal services, therapy, support services, other things to victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, and human trafficking. We also have a smaller shelter that a lot of people don't know about, but that is just for homeless crime victims. In 2015, the Yolo Family Resource Center merged with Empower Yolo, and that really allowed us to expand in a lot of ways. And one thing we did is we expanded financial literacy programming and benefit enrollment so that people in the community could find out about resources that they might not know about and benefit from those. We opened our clothing closet, which had been just for victims of domestic violence, to the entire community. And that brought in a lot more people who needed services, who didn't even know what other services they qualified for. So that clothing closet has really just been an open door for people to come in and learn about other things. We also began providing diapers in the community and doing food distribution at some of our sites. In addition to ramping up all of our services during the pandemic, and we didn't close, not for one day. And you know, it never occurred to me that we might not be an essential service. And that first day after everything closed down, there were so many people at our door waiting, not even really knowing what they needed, but they just needed a place to go. So we've been a community partner in a lot of different things that have gone on since the beginning of the pandemic, but one is Project Room Key, which we'll probably talk about a little bit later. I think that that's really unique and probably a model for the country and how to deal with homelessness during a pandemic. So hopefully we'll talk a little bit about that. And then, as Sandra mentioned, we're part of the COVID-19 rental assistance. We're one of the local partners with the state, which also includes the Yolo County Children's Alliance and Shores of Hope. That's it.
So I guess I'll go next. I just want to preface really quick, I'm Asian American, and so I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the 6 women who were shot day before yesterday in Atlanta who were immigrants. I mention them because many of them were actually living at the parlors where they were killed. So they were, in fact, without housing, staying at their workplace because they had nowhere else to live. So I just wanted to take a moment and acknowledge their memories. So the Outpatient Yolo project is, we do not have an office. We are not an official nonprofit. We rely on the Yolo Interfaith Immigration Network to be our fiscal sponsor as well as our partner. We began, just over a year ago. I do want to mention that we did not start out as an organization or a project really to address housing insecurity. A bunch of people had gotten together because in February last year, there was an ICE raid in Davis. I found out about it because a friend of mine had texted me to say that her ex had been pulled over. and had almost been detained, but he was able to get away. We found out later that day that there was a father in our school district who was detained and later deported. So we originally came together in order to figure out how to keep Spanish-speaking immigrants in Davis and Yolo County safe from deportation. And then we had an entire plan to do outreach through the schools. And then the pandemic happened, the schools closed, and our entire avenue for doing education closed along with it. So we rapidly discovered, because we'd already started doing outreach to some families, that with businesses being closed, that a lot of these families were left completely without income, and that we were prepared to switch gears and start providing services to them, provide information in Spanish, which they were finding very difficult to access. And we quickly realized that housing insecurity was their overwhelming concern. I think it's no secret that Davis in particular has above market rents. This makes it very difficult for our families to just stay housed even when they have a regular income coming in. And so with many of them laid off and with their hours reduced, they were really in a panic about how they would begin to cover rent. And because of our families' particular histories, a lot of them have come over as asylum seekers. They have very poor histories with government agencies. They are very frightened of a lot of government agencies, and they don't want to get in trouble with the law at all. And so they will go hungry in order to cover rent. They will absolutely forego food in order to make sure that they pay rent in full, in order to prevent the landlord from having any quibble with them whatsoever. So we are primarily, we have one person in our organization who is the lead, who is paid for his work. Everyone else is a volunteer. So we did a very ground up model. It's very intensive. It's very culturally specific. So each of our families gets a personal volunteer assigned to them. We have a warm handoff from the person who referred them to us to that volunteer, because there's a big issue with trust with a lot of our family members. This is really important to establish this chain of trust. And so our volunteers check in with their families every single month. We assess their needs, and then we try to distribute rental assistance every month based on their needs. So we calculate how much they're able to contribute, what their full rental amount is, how much we can afford to give each family, how many family members is each mini grant supporting, etc. I do want to mention that we rely a lot on Empower Yolo because we are just a small grassroots, started from the ground up and don't have the wealth of knowledge that an organization like Empower Yolo has. We rely on them quite a bit to also support our families and just help carry them through. So we're hoping, once the pandemic ends, that our services will be no longer needed. Because this is an ongoing problem that began before the pandemic started, we'll just have to see what happens, but we're hoping these families will be, fully employed again and get back on their feet. So anyway, that's what we're doing.
Thank you, Anush. Doug.
Yeah, many of you may have heard of Fourth and Hope or are familiar with Fourth and Hope. Fourth and Hope also has been known as the Yolo Wayfair Center. And we have been providing services in Woodland and Yolo County for 36 years now. I've been a part of the organization since 2013. And in that time, we've seen the need for our services and the services for those that you've already heard from, that needs increased dramatically over the last handful of years. And so we're looking as an organization, how do we better address the needs here locally, continuing to stay in the lane that we were established to provide those services in, and do it well. Our services include really two areas. One is homeless services, and then we also have treatment services for those that are dealing with substance use disorders and some co-occurring mental health issues as well. And so in the homeless services front, though, our flagship program is our homeless shelter. And our homeless shelter, the homeless shelter that we've known for the last, I guess it's now been 15 years, located at 4th and North, only had capacity for about 60 to 65 individuals and families with children. And so, as you may see throughout the community, there's a lot of individuals in need of shelter, and that number is far north of the 65 capacity we've had at that facility. But we have done quite well with that location in the last measurable year, 1920 fiscal year. We served over 300 people through that shelter program at that location, of which 70 of them were able to find permanent supportive housing. Many of them that were there during that time, some of which may still be there today, because housing has been a difficult, it's been a difficult trajectory to get people from unhoused into housing. But we are working diligently in that area. Other aspects of our homeless services new to us is day services now that are being provided at our new location. But then we also have provided housing, and in our housing we've several different types of housing. One is our permanent supportive housing units, where we've been able to maintain housing for several people. I want to say the number is about 28 individuals and that would include families. We also have, similar to Empower Yolo, a couple locations for victims of crime. It's transitional housing for them until they can find permanent housing, or until we can help them navigate to permanent housing. Then we also provide transitional housing. We term it a sober living environment housing for those that would be transitioning from the criminal justice setting and need a safe place to transition until they can be permanently housed and stable on their own. And so across that, we have served with the shelter and our transitional and permanent supportive housing programs. We've seen as many as 240 people housed successfully within a year's time. And that's our homeless services side. And then on our treatment services side, we do provide outpatient treatment. Our outpatient treatment services are being provided currently in our old shelter facility located at 4th and North Street. And then our permanent support, or our, not permanent, but our residential treatment, also known as Walter's House, which is the same Walter that Sandra alluded to earlier as being my grandfather. Walter's House has 44 beds. With the clinical model of treatment that we've started to implement over the last few years, our capacity is really around 36 individuals in that program. And that is also located at on 4th Street next door to the old shelter. We have hopes over the next 18 months to 2 years to be able to locate to a newer facility that better fits our need for a clinical model of treatment. And so we have a lot of exciting things going on with Fourth and Hope, within Woodland, within Yolo County. And it's not about, and I say this a lot to our team, it's not about becoming a great organization. It's really about being great at serving those that come through our organization. And so we don't aspire to grow for the sake of looking big. We aspire to grow because the need has grown. And there is a deep need for us to be very compassionate in reaching those that are dealing with unhoused issues, substance use disorder issues, and showing with great compassion that there is a future and a hope for them. And so that's why we desire as an organization to continue to grow. I will say about 4 years ago, I was standing in front of the shelter and seeing the immense need that was growing around our facility that we were unable to adequately meet, and in some ways feeling a bit overwhelmed by it all. But as I had conversations with our different partners, including local jurisdictions, local politicians, things of that nature, I began to see a developing partnership across many fronts that wanted to engage in doing something meaningful, impactful, and beneficial to the entire community. And so with that, we're seeing the development now of East Beamer Way, located at basically East Beamer and Road 102. And so we moved in the first of the year to our new shelter at 1901 East Beamer Way, or East Beamer Street. It's a facility that was built for sheltering up to 100 adults, individual adults. And then with that, we do have day services throughout the day where they can access laundry and showers and meals as well. With that, we foresee housing being built out there and a new treatment facility. So there's a lot of exciting things on the horizon, and I would say not for our homeless community, but for our entire community of Yolo County. Because I think when we address the needs of our neighbor, it helps all the community heal. So I am really excited and honored to be a part of this today.
Thank you. I'm thinking now about the eviction moratorium and the individuals you each are already serving, and this concern about and basically a growing number of individuals who lose their housing and are either staying with other people, interim, or ending up literally homeless, but basically without economic support are struggling to come up with the next steps. And so I was thinking of this question for both Anush and Lynette in particular, the folks you serve, that while the government have, at all levels, have responded to the housing insecurity issues with both the eviction moratorium and rent relief, I'm curious about, to what extent do you feel these policies are addressing the depth of the need that you're seeing, and how will these growing needs be impacted as both the eviction moratorium ends and the rental relief funds are fully expended? So Anush, would you like to go first?
Sure. So I would say certainly those two policies have been crucial for our families. When we did a sponsorship for our families at the end of the year for the holidays, we got a lot of thank you messages back, and just so many of them said that the difference that Apo Yolo had made in their lives is that, you know, they would be on the street if they hadn't received our support. For a lot of them, they were not aware of the procedure in order to invoke the eviction protection. And so while that policy has done a lot in order to keep our families housed, there were situations where our families would have been evicted if we hadn't been supporting them, and if they hadn't been able to turn to us for advice about how to avoid eviction. So they didn't know the policy was in place. They didn't know how to activate it. They didn't know what letter to write to their landlords or management companies. We did have a family where the mother was undergoing cancer treatments, and they received an eviction notice, you know, in the middle of a pandemic while their mother was undergoing cancer treatment. You know, ultimately she passed away a few months after that. But, you know, we were able to keep her family from getting evicted, and she, you know, it gave her such peace of mind to know that that they were not going to be put out on the street, in addition to, you know, dealing with her ends of days. So let's see. So we've been immensely grateful for eviction protection. Here we are, over a year into the pandemic. Our particular organization is having trouble finding funds for April, even to cover our families to the 25% that they need in order to maintain eviction protections. So even the 25% is still a struggle for many of our families. And then finally, a lot of the financial supports that have been offered to our families to, help cover their rents, both in present and their back rents. We still have a lot of trouble accessing them. And so in terms of getting grants, say from the Yolo Community Foundation, and being able to distribute that money directly, that has been just a huge relief and given our families a lot of peace of mind to have like an individual person that they interact with over time, that they trust, and be able to talk to that person, like really describe their individual circumstances and be able to be supported according to their individual need, which again, it's a very intensive model. Like we thought we would have to do this for 3 months. And if we had to do it for years, the way that Empower Yolo does, I don't know how we would maintain it. But this is like, as a cultural ideal, this is how you would do it. In working with Yolo County to access what we're called tenant-based relief, tenant-based, the TBRA program, there was a lot of ways that Yolo County Housing really thought they were trying to make the process easy and acceptable. And so it was like, they made this much progress towards our families, but in order to make it truly accessible, like they really needed this much. And again, like having our support and having a volunteer who could work with them individually, having a volunteer who could use their email address, in case the family did not have an email address, like those little things made a huge difference. And, we're so glad that we've been able to offer this to families in Davis and Winters while being very aware of how much greater need there is throughout Yolo County, much less the rest of California, for example.
Well, and it really speaks to the individual and unique needs of the folks who are experiencing housing insecurity, and the impacts of the pandemic nature of it as well.
Right.
And the difficulties in staying connected to community. So Lynette, from your perspective, how would you respond to this?
Well, it's been really interesting just the whole year. None of us obviously in the beginning thought that things were going to go on this long. And so the funding from government agencies has come out very piecemeal and, in little chunks that, you try to coordinate in order to best serve a family. And one of the things too is that we literally had people who were donors of ours in the past who were suddenly coming to us for services. And so there was this unique group of people that were coming who didn't know anything about any of these kinds of programs, service programs, where to go for help. So we had that. I remember one woman coming in and saying, I started working as a teenager and I've always paid my rent. I've always paid my car payment. I've always been self-sufficient. And I can't believe I'm in this place now where I need assistance. And if we had only had government funding, we could not have made the difference that was needed in her life. And so that's why the partnership of foundation funding and individual donors and government funding is really important to, in order to provide, cohesive services for families. There, the people who call and say, I just need a $10 copay for my prescription. And as a nonprofit, being able to just provide that because somebody donated money towards that. Those little things make a difference. And, being able to provide some of the other things that were mentioned before, things like diapers and food distribution and things like that. So that helps you pay your rent or pays for some of the other things. So it's not all just about housing, but I am concerned. There's been, you know, a lot of delays too in getting that government funding out. And so we have programs that we're all running and helping people, you know, with the promise that the funding is coming. And so, you know, the government's just not very fast at getting things out, which is why nonprofits are really important in communities anyway. And in talking about the COVID-19 rental assistance program that we talked about, mentioned earlier, where landlords can get 80% of the rent if they will waive 20%. The issue with that program is that it requires that both the landlord and the tenant agree to participate. And so if the landlord chooses not to, and they have some valid reasons not to. I had one landlord say to me, you don't go to the restaurant and just pay 80% of your bill, or you don't go to Walmart and just say, no, I'm only going to give you 80%. And so there are real reasons why landlords aren't participating. But the problem with that is that if the landlord doesn't participate, the tenant can only get 25% of the rental arrears. And some of our families haven't paid rent for a year. You know, they owe $9,000, $10,000, and 25% is going to leave them homeless anyway at the end of all of this. And then there's people who already moved from their apartment because they couldn't afford it, but they still owe that landlord money. And that new program won't help those people either. So because it is eviction prevention. And so one of my concerns is that there's been funding all along for eviction prevention. We've been doing that for years. But when the rental relief program came out, we were told we couldn't use the government funding for eviction prevention anymore. So we had to reallocate those funds to other things. There are people who are not going to be helped with the rental assistance program who still need eviction prevention services. And so again, I think that we, as along with Yolo, will be going, you know, back to our donors and saying, hey, we still need to help our families in this community. So as I said, the government funding's been great, and when it works really well. And we've been able to help. I think this year we housed over 200 people, and I don't even know how many people we did rental assistance for. The numbers just keep growing. But I am concerned about what will happen when the government funding's gone. There's a lot of people who are going to fall through the gap.
Yeah, I appreciate those comments. It's a really important context for this, because you're right that they're building from models that are not just 100% back to the start of when people began accruing debt. And so it brings me to this question for you, Doug, which, given that Fourth and Hope is about serving individuals already homeless, and there's this concern about an influx of additional people falling into homelessness and struggling to get rapidly rehoused, how do you think that the public discourse on homelessness has been impacted by the pandemic? And in that frame, what do you think are the impacts or overarching effects for individuals and families who will be seeking housing?
You know, you actually just triggered a different thought, and then hearing Lynette speak a minute ago, you know, there is a wave that's coming. I think the current discourse maybe has quieted a little bit regarding the homeless issue that we've seen, because the homeless issue that we have seen prior to the pandemic has lessened somewhat, because there's been a huge influx of, not huge, but there's been an influx of funds to house homeless through Project Room Key and through different avenues as that. So visually you're seeing fewer and fewer, but this is funding that will eventually disappear. And then you look at the future of those that will become homeless because of the evictions that are looming. And it's going to be a huge wave that we need to be prepared for. What I think the pandemic did for us is it did show us, though, that if we take immediate action and we resource it well, we can make a big impact and do a lot of good. And I think that it really right-sized our mindset around what kind of resources are actually needed to make a huge impact when it comes to homelessness. We have seen a lot over the years where there's been a little bit of funding from here and a little bit of funding from there and some donations from over here, but it's just been a little bit. And so then we make a little bit of an impact. There's been a lot of resources that have come now through the pandemic and a lot of the grants and different things out there around that that have been impactful, but that will come to an end. And so I think just we have to realize that we're in this for the long haul, and there's looming issues ahead of us that we're going to have to be prepared for. And it's, you know, the federal government, the state government, local governments alone aren't going to be able to solve it. It is really going to take all of us as neighbors coming together and trying to help one another. And it's, we have, and this is separate from Fourth and Hope, but I am a pastor in town, and our church started doing a food distribution in partnership with the food bank on Monday nights. And I marvel, we have almost 1,000 people now come out on Monday nights just to get food. And because there's such a need, and that in some ways is kind of below the surface and not seen. And so if we find ourselves in a position where we in and of ourselves are feeling somewhat secure and comfortable, I think this is a good opportunity for us to say, well, let's take a look around, because that security doesn't exist for everybody, and they're not all comfortable. And our security and comfort is maybe available to us so we can help others. But I think the discourse is maybe quieted a little bit. I think it's going to ramp up a lot in the next 12 months. And but we now understand a little bit better what it's going to take to actually meet the needs.
Well, thank you. And for the folks listening to the conversation here, I want to define Project Room Key that's been referenced a few times. That was an effort at the start of the pandemic. It really initiated originally through the Department of Social Services at the state level to offer non-congregate shelter, it's referred to, so basically motel rooms, to any individual living homeless who was at risk of having complications should they contract COVID. And what was originally thought of as a really short-term intervention at the start of the pandemic has become an ongoing intervention, and at the state level then has morphed a little bit into the next phase, which is called Project Home Key, so that jurisdictions who want to purchase property and then convert it for individuals who are homeless have been given that opportunity. And in Yolo County, there is one Project Home Key motel already up and running, and that's in West Sacramento. So I want to give that context. But the other thing that came up for me in this last set of answers is really about a much broader context to what people facing housing insecurity are facing, and it has to do with individual context. So I'm wondering if you can respond to how you see the impacts of income inequality and racial inequity affecting those who are experiencing housing insecurity across your programs. What are your thoughts on that? Let's start with whoever. Lynette, you're off mute. You go.
Okay. So, you know, I think even before the pandemic hit, of course, when we would do the homeless count in Yolo County, we definitely saw the racial disparity of people who were homeless. And so that has only been amplified as the pandemic has gone on. You know, just looking at who is contracting it and where testing is available and where it isn't available. I think that there's been a lot of progress working with migrant farmers who were totally left out of everything in the beginning. And so there's been a lot of lessons learned. But I do think that also when it comes to these programs, we do a disservice when we offer programs that are first come, first serve. And they're the easiest to do. I get it. There's, hotline you can call starting at midnight and get your name on a list or whatever. But those really leave out the people who need it the most. If you're, English is your second language, you're waiting on a nonprofit to take the information, translate it, and then send it back out and get it to you. And so you're not going to be the first in line. If you're low income and you don't have internet, you can't log on at midnight to get into whatever program there is. And so I think we need to rethink the way that we do a lot of services, the way that we offer them, and really think about how we get them to the people that most need them. For the problems that might come about with the California COVID rental assistance program, one good thing that they did do is say that although you can apply if you're up to 80% of the area of median income, they're prioritizing the people who are 50% or below. So, and then they're offering their funding in rounds. And so they'll be looking for those lower income folks as they go through each round. And so we need to think of more things like that, where we really are evaluating how we reach out to the people who most need the services, and how do people access services too. I do think, having local projects where people, can walk up to the door and go in and ask a question is really important. There's been a lot of programs that went online or by phone, because of the pandemic. And while I totally understand that, I think that just made more people come to our door because they needed to talk to a person and ask questions. And so we really need to think about how do people access services, and make sure that those who need it most are at the head of the line and not somewhere in the middle or the back of the line.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would like to emphasize that, obviously a lot of these inequalities existed before COVID-19, and then COVID-19 really exacerbated them. So all the holes that existed in our social safety net became just gaping caverns. And so, with the population that we work with, Spanish-speaking immigrants, they are, they were either completely out of work or they were essential workers and they had to keep working. We've had families that got COVID-19 twice. And we have been like, we are English speakers, most of us in the organization are bilingual, culturally comfortable in the United States. And there were still a lot of services that our families could have taken advantage of when they came down with COVID-19 that we still didn't even know about. So for these families, like, those barriers were enormous. The main, right when I started the project, the main purpose I had or that we had, my co-founders and I, in establishing the project, was to actually make Spanish-speaking immigrants feel like they were included in the community. Because when the pandemic came down, they immediately felt isolated for all the reasons that Lynette mentioned. Things were not available in their language. People were the channels that people were using for communication were not channels that people tune into. The amount of information on Spanish-speaking radio, for example, was a lot lower than what you could find online. And so, there was not just a funding gap and a financial gap, but also just an information gap. And so our primary purpose was to help these families feel like they were actually connected to the community. And so they had somebody to go to find this information. But, absolutely, these are some of these folks, circumstances can change in a moment, and a family that was keeping up with their rent suddenly has nothing, zero income whatsoever, 3 children, can't work because childcare is inaccessible, so it's a choice between, do I stay home with my children or do I go to work? And, and certainly when we're looking at COVID-19, when we're looking at the lingering effects, people who might have long COVID, the effects are just going to be felt, as Doug was saying, for a really long time. And it would be so much better if we would be able to really aggressively tackle this now, instead of waiting for it to rise to crisis level and then dealing with it.
Thank you. Doug, do you want to respond to this as well?
Well, I think that a lot's been said. It's all good. I don't want to be redundant. I think there is some of the thoughts I have around, especially on the income inequality piece, is I also think that that's been exasperated. I don't, if you've had a solid income, you were able to navigate and you were able to maintain your income, you were able to navigate the pandemic probably quite well. Yeah, being isolated wasn't great. All those things weren't fantastic, but financially you were able to get through it. Those that did not have means or lost their means, it's been devastating. And some of them, and Lynette mentioned it earlier, have never been in a place where they were losing their housing or potentially were homeless, and they don't know where to start. And so then if there's these other inequalities out there that they're battling, now it's just been a major life-changing, and potentially for some, all hope has been lost. And so, and that's where that face-to-face piece and the ability to go face-to-face is so important, because the website's not going to help someone when they're really, because it's not just data, it's feelings, it's emotions, and it's a mental health issue for some that they've never dealt with before because they've never been depressed to this degree. So we have to have nonprofits that are willing to roll up their sleeves and go face-to-face with people that are truly hurting, and then start to navigate the real details of, hey, you're going to get a pandemic check or a stimulus check. Here's the best way to utilize that so that we can get you on track. But if we can't go face-to-face with people and then show them the compassion they need, then it's hard to get the traction that needed in order to really put them on the path that's going to best serve them long-term. So, but I think the face-to-face piece, the compassion piece is huge to what you were saying, Lynette, in really helping level the playing field in these inequalities. And with that, showing the compassion that we all deserve as individuals. So
I really love that theme about, because it gets at the individual uniqueness of each person who's out there going through this pandemic and in their own circumstances, that it has to be about our face-to-face and getting back to the world in that way. And also, I love this comment about the aggressive approach to this, that it just has to be moving forward with everything that people have learned through this. So I guess one of the things I then also want to ask all of you, and then we can shift after this to questions that are coming up in the chat, but I'm wondering, from your perspective, it's been a long year. It's continue, we're in the middle of the next long year with this. And I'm wondering what, from your perspective in driving these really critical organizations in the community, what gives you hope about the path forward, both you, your staff, the people you're serving? What inspires that hope?
I can go. I have, and I'm going to just brag on the Fourth and Hope team. I've always known them to be very, I'd use the word durable, but now I'll use the term resilient. The resilience of the team has been amazing. Our shelter manager, she quit counting after 19 COVID tests, how many times she had been tested for COVID. And, but yet with tears in her eyes, she'll tell you about all the success stories that have come through the shelter. The human component of what we do has risen to the surface. And I'm a business guy at heart. And so I'll look at dollars and cents, and I'll look at cost and income, and I'll look at all those things. At the end of the day, it's the human element that has impressed me. And then with that, partnering with other, whether it be local jurisdictions, cities, counties, healthcare industries, whatever it might be, when you're talking to those individuals, there's more discussion around the human element than there is around the dollars and cents. There are resources out there, and we do meet and talk about the resources. How can we expand shelter services? How can we expand housing services? How can we expand treatment services? But really, why are they wanting to do it? And it's because they truly want to help people be healthy and healed, not just, and physical health has been our focus for the last year, but I also feel like we're shifting back to looking at mental health and things of that nature now, because it's been a tough year for mental health. And so I think for me, what gives me hope is that people still care and really want to help one another.
Thank you.
I just really want to piggyback on that, because pretty much everything you said, one of the biggest things that has helped lift me this year really is our staff, and the fact that every time that I've said, hey, Sandra called and said they need help doing this, do you guys want to sign up? And they do. Nobody's ever said no, like, no, I can't change my job. This is the job you hired me to do. I'm not going to go do that. They just do it. And I'm amazed. And sometimes, you know, our staff, they start doing things I don't even know we do. Like, someone will come in for a service. I'm like, we do that service? Okay, great. I'm really happy about that. Just because they're learning about things and they're just sharing that knowledge with whoever walks in the door and whatever they need. So I've really been, you know, our staff and our board, volunteers, all of those folks have been great, but it's really the community. And we had to, as I mentioned, we have a community clothing closet, and many of you, while you were home quarantining, decided to clean your closets, which was really great, but we had to stop taking donations for a while because you overwhelmed us with your generosity. That's a good problem to have, though, so I'm okay with that. But the community really has, you know, in the beginning, people sewing masks, you know, there weren't enough masks around. People were just sewing masks and dropping them off, and that was really important to us. And it also, we felt that support from the community as those things came along. But, and just also, something Doug said, the nonprofits working together in ways we never have before. I think that we have all just strengthened our relationships. You know, we've looked at those holes in the social safety net, and we've looked at how we can fix that. And that is, you know, I turn to other nonprofit leaders all the time and say, anybody got any ideas what we could do for this person? And there, you know, people always come forward. Well, how about this? How about this? How about this? And so that's probably been one of the things that's lifted me up the most this year, is just looking at how we can all work together to solve things. And, you know, the food bank, I just have to mention the food bank. I know everyone does, but you cannot imagine what they've done this year and the amount of food that they put out in the community. And every time we call them, you know, they're there. What do you need? How can we get this to the people that need it? And it's just been amazing. So yeah, kudos to them.
That's a great shout out. Thanks. Anush?
Yeah, I mean, I think Doug and Lynette covered a lot of, you know, what has been inspirational. Certainly Yolo County in general, the outpouring of generosity, both in not just money, but also labor. You know, I relied on the mask makers a lot this year. You know, the county was giving out disposable masks, but, you know, for those families, like being able to get a cloth mask that was washable and reusable is incredibly valuable. And I would say, just like the relationships again, between our volunteers and their families. One of our co-founders, Ximena Jackson, said, "I have never been blessed so much in my life." Just every time that she talks to her families, they are just so grateful, not just for the financial support, but for the contact and for the knowing that people see them. And so what I'm hoping continues going forward is this lens of equity that we have been talking about this entire year, as we have been talking with the city and with the county about accessibility of services and testing and how to distribute the vaccinations and things like that. And I'm really hoping one of the things that we're looking at is there a way for us to bring our families together in order to continue advocating for themselves about what they need and ways that that they need to be seen and responded to. In Yolo County, it's very frequent to think of our population exclusively as farm workers, but we have a large population that is not farm workers, that live here year round, that are in our restaurants, in our grocery stores, in our bakeries, and and are a consistent part of our communities and need to be included. I've had, I'm still seeing lots of people who make arguments about what should be done or what should not be done, especially in the school system, based on people who are marginalized, but they're not talking to the people who are marginalized. And so what I'm really hoping we can bring out of this is some kind of, channel where people who are living in that situation are able to speak for themselves and speak directly to people in power instead of having it channeled, along this telephone line.
Really great comments. Thank you. And people are echoing that in the chat. I want to pose a question that someone put in to each of you, tagging onto some of your comments. Winters Farm to Fork board member Kathy Olson shared at the last panel discussion, this was the one on food insecurity, that families have been able to pay rent or secure housing when their food needs are met. And then it says in quotes, "The meals we're providing are enabling families to stretch their food dollars, feed their children, and helping them to remain in their housing." So the question is, how is this newfound understanding regarding free food distributions increasing housing security, influencing local and regional housing policy? Any of you can respond to that.
I will say one thing about, number one, so many families were already food insecure long before the pandemic. But one of the things that we've been able to offer for several months now is rental assistance for families, excuse me, who couldn't pay their rent. And every time that we have said to someone, we can do this much, can you do that much? They've always said, yes, I can pay this much of my rent if you can help me with the rest. And then if we say to them, if we could get you groceries and if we could fill that diaper bag and we could do these other things, could you pay more? And they always tell us yes. The average rent in Yolo County, I don't even know how much it is, but most people I know are paying over $1,000 a month. But the people who came to us for help were asking for $600-700 a month usually. So it wasn't that they had zero funds, it's that they were struggling with how to, what to use those funds for, So even the people who were able to get unemployment or were able to work part-time or do other things, they couldn't do everything. They couldn't make it through the entire month with the amount of funds that they had. So I do think we really do need to think about food programs and how they impact families. And it's different than, when you're applying for a lot of different types of assistance, food stamps are taken in as income. They're counted as income. And so having actual food being given to you is something that brings down your monthly bills, as opposed to here's a card that you can go use to go buy food. So I think we really do need those food banks and those food opportunities for people in order to make it through the month. It really matters.
It's a really good point about the kind of food support that adds to an individual's income and impacts on another side, as opposed to just flat out food support for people who need to eat.
I would just like us to think larger so that, you know, when we're thinking about families' income, we're not thinking either or, you know, that this family can spend money on food or they can spend it on housing. You know, I would really like us, our end goal to be that these families can, you know, can just take care of their needs. And, you know, and that gets into the deeper questions that we haven't really talked about yet, which is, you know, housing supply in Yolo County, particularly in Davis, and how do we bring down those housing costs? How do we, you know, develop housing so that people don't need a car if they don't have to have one, or if they can't afford one, in order to pick up food and in order to go to their jobs. You know, so while it's good as a stopgap measure that we have this food distribution, which then, you know, and again, like our families will absolutely go without food in order to pay rent. So they will use that money for rent no matter what. The food assistance means whether they eat or not. And that's how it breaks down for our families most of the time. But our eventual goal has to be making housing more affordable, making sure wages are sustainable, making food sure that all kinds of, you know, the abundance of food that we have in Yolo County is accessible for all of our families. Like, these are the bigger questions that we really want to work towards in the long term.
So Anush, one of the questions in the chat that this actually gets to, it says, what new challenges do you anticipate after or as the pandemic comes to an end? And I guess, you know, part of what I hear you referencing is there's this policy level issue facing the communities in California around how do we manage this growing cost of housing and everything that comes with that, all the way down to this micro level. So I guess I'm wondering from you as panelists, what in addressing those policy challenges and speaking to the community on the call today, how you think people can be of assistance in that work and how your organization can be of assistance in that policy level work.
I totally agree with what Anush said a moment ago, because feeding individuals through, you know, available food through the food bank, whatever that might be, is a wonderful thing, but it can't be the forever thing. And so we do need to look at income equality to the cost of housing, the cost of living, and how do we address that on a policy level when it comes to all the way to the banks that are loaning money so that units can be built. We need units not just for the extreme low income who we serve on the daily, but we need more housing inventory for all levels of income. You know, I have adult children living with me, and I have no idea how I would like to have an idea, but I have no idea how they're going to get out on their own, because it's just it's formidable, and for them to still have a life. And not live just to have housing. And so, because just to have a shelter is not what would be considered life. It'd be survival. And so we would love to be able to have a community where where it's a nice place to live and be enjoyable. But we have to have policy discussions and inventory discussions. I know the housing elements being looked at Davis. We just had some discussions in Woodland. We really need to see additional housing built, but then we also need to be having these discussions with banks and can not just local government, but state and federal governments get involved in making sure that there is going to be places for people to live, and then not just live, but have a home. And so it's a huge, I mean, we're not going to solve it here, but we need to talk about it here and then talk about it in a lot of other places and not stop talking about it ever. We can celebrate the wins when we're feeding people that don't have food so they can pay their rent today, but we have to keep talking about the tomorrows, or we're always going to be trying to survive today. And so I think if I was to encourage any of us or all of us, is that when we step away from this, we continuously talk to everybody about we need more places for people to live that are affordable within their lifestyle. And my kids don't need a large home. They just need a place to call home.
Mhm.
And we're providing for that for them for now, but one day they would like to have their own. So, and then you look at an individual that's trying to live off of Social Security, and the most rent they would be able to afford would be $300 to $400 a month, and still have a little extra to enjoy their life. And so you're not going to find a place for that amount of rent. And so we need to really start looking at all levels of housing inventory.
I think one thing that the pandemic and an opportunity that it gave us is that unfortunately a lot of businesses either closed or they figured out different ways to provide services in the community. And so there are a lot of empty buildings. And there might be an opportunity if we can get creative and think about different types of housing needs. There's lots of different housing models aside from just the traditional home, as Doug just mentioned. So we should look at creative ways to use that. We need to think about zoning. We need to think about making sure that that neighborhoods have people of all different incomes, and that builds actually a neighborhood if you can do that. And so I think there's just so many things that that we're not even talking about now because we're still in this crisis, but that really we do need to be talking about right now as we move forward. And then just home ownership and home equity for people of color in general. There has all of those programs that are out there for rental assistance are great, but we're not talking about foreclosure assistance. So there's families that are really struggling there who aren't finding help. So I think there are a lot of long-term systemic issues, but there's also, I do think we're at a point where we can, if we can think creatively, we can make change.
Yeah,
I love that. Anush, do you want to chime in on this too?
sure. I want to give a quick shout out to my own neighborhood of Wild Horse, which I feel is one of the very few like really genuinely mixed income neighborhoods in Davis. As a person of color in Davis, I talk to a lot of people of color about how isolated many of us feel. And I feel relatively not isolated in Wild Horse. I feel like we have a lot of people of color, and some of our families live in this neighborhood. So I would really like to see more of that in Davis. And throughout Yolo County, really. But in terms of the long-term effects of the pandemic, as I mentioned, long COVID is being talked about as, a long-term disability challenge that is going to face a lot of communities. We don't know what that impact is going to look like right now, but we have to consider that as we look to the future. And I would just hope we would take this opportunity where we had this pandemic and our systems really fell down. I mean, they really, really fell down. And my greatest fear is that once folks are vaccinated and life goes back more or less as normal, that we won't try to take any lessons from what happened, and we'll just continue to go on as normal without trying to fix these systems and really create a solid social safety net so that if we have another pandemic, which is highly likely, that we won't be in this absolute crisis situation again, where, we do have masses of people going hungry. We have people who, had never experienced housing insecurity before are suddenly like, oh my goodness, I am, weeks away from being unhoused. So this is, it's both my greatest hope and my greatest fear is that, that we will take these lessons and that we will actually take action on them in a timely fashion instead of just constantly kicking the can down the road.
So to the action in the short term, the housing element got mentioned. Each community has a housing element. They're all on different timelines, and they are the opportunity for individuals in community to give your ideas, and the important and the government jurisdictions actually then have to incorporate all that information and rank it. But it's about these kinds of things you want in your community, what types of housing, where the housing goes, zoning stuff, all that kind of input. So in the chat, I see that someone put in that the Davis element is accepting input on their current planning work through March 23rd. So right now is a great time to input to the Davis housing element. And then I guess because we're coming down to some wind down, I would like, one, again, to thank all of you as panelists, but also to see if you, in closing, can make a couple of comments to folks about how they might support or contribute to the effort of your organization's work.
Can I go first? Because mine is very simple.
Yep.
We need money. We do not know how we are going to cover our families for April. We desperately need money so that we can cover these families. Additionally, if there are other folks out here who are bilingual, we could cover more families if we had more volunteers. We are very stretched. Again, our model is really intensive. We do ask for a commitment over a few months at least. The work level changes. Sometimes we need more, sometimes we need less, but those are two main asks. Please donate to the Yolo Interfaith Immigration Network. And if you are interested in volunteering, please do get in touch. Thank you so much. I'm very honored to be on this panel.
Thank you. And the website is now in the chat. Lynette or Doug?
I guess I just would echo all of that. Obviously, all of our organizations depend on the generosity of our donors, so that is really important. And then I do think if you have the opportunity to work on these issues and talk to politicians, local, state, federal, about the housing issues that you see, I do think that type of advocacy really does make a difference. It doesn't feel like it does because it takes a long time, but I really do think that happens as well. And then also, if you're a landlord, give people a chance. There's so many people who really, maybe they messed up once in their life and they have a bad rental history, or because of the pandemic, they now have an eviction. Really, I just urge you to look past that and give people opportunities. I think you'd be surprised at how well it might work for you.
I think there's not much more to say. Time and money are the things that we all need. And for you that are listening to us and those that are talking, I mean, those are the things that we need. And we at Fourth and Hope, in partnership with Friends of the Mission and different other partners, we're developing East Beamer Way. I know that Friends of the Mission probably has a gap of funding in the $3 to $4 million range ultimately. They are moving forward. It's being developed and built. The total project was going to be north of $15 million. And so they've done a great job in finding grants and funding for the project. For us at Fourth and Hope, we operate services. We're not building the facilities, but we do provide the ongoing services. And my hope is that Fourth and Hope will be around for the next 50 to 100 years, and that we continue to provide services, and that and then as long as I'm here, that we're putting together sustainable funding that'll keep it going for many years to come. And so that is our need. But the volunteer piece is huge too. And we've been able to, volunteering during the pandemic was next to impossible. And so we had shut down our volunteer programs, and we missed all our volunteers. We still miss a lot of our volunteers because for us, they were just as much staff as our staff have been. And so I'm happy to say that we are welcoming volunteers again. And because we still have our commercial kitchen at the old shelter in town, we're able to have volunteers come in and cook there. And then we transport the meals in to-go containers out to the new shelter, so there's not commingling with clients. So, you know, it's time and money, and my promise is just to be, and I'm sure Anusha and Lynette would say the same, we're going to stretch the dollar as thin as we possibly can stretch it, because it's what we do as nonprofits. I'm amazed what we can get for just a few cents. And it is because we do partner with people like the food bank. And so we can not have to exhaust funds on groceries, but the food bank does well for us there. And so we're going to do our best to spread that dollar as thin as we possibly can. And I look at everybody on here as you care. You're here today because you care, and just thank you for caring and giving us this opportunity to just chat with you all. And I'm honored. Thank you for having us as well.
Well, I want to thank all three of you for your time today and your expertise and your ongoing work. It really is a contribution to the community every day, and your dedication just to support these kinds of forums so that folks can connect and realize the opportunity available every day to be of assistance in the world. It's really a good contribution. So thank you all for your time.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Sandra, and to our wonderful panel. Thank you so much for sharing your tremendous expertise and your passion today. To all of our participants, thank you for joining us and for being so engaged in this topic. I particularly love seeing the meeting of the minds in the chat box. Our final panel is next Thursday, March 25th from 11 to 12:30. In this final panel, we'll be looking at what comes next for Yolo County as we emerge from the crisis and building on our learnings from the last 4 weeks. Our panelists will be UC Davis Chancellor Gary May, Yolo County Supervisor Jim Provenza, Sutter Davis CEO Rachel McKinney, and the Valley Vision CEO Evan Schmidt. And we're thrilled for the opportunity to host a discussion with such a wonderful group of panelists. For more information and for the links to register, as well as recordings from today and past panels, please go to yolocf.org. And thank you so much for joining us and for the work all of you are doing in our community. Thank you.